Hi guys, tonight we begin a calm journey into the life of one of history's most inventive minds. This is the story of Thomas Edison, the man whose name became forever linked with light itself. We will follow his path from a curious boy with a restless spirit to the tireless inventor who brought light to the world, step by step, in a way that feels both human and timeless. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. So let us begin, slowly and quietly, with his earliest days. Thomas Alva Edison was born on February 11th, 1847, in the small town of Milan, Ohio. The world he entered was one without electricity, without telephones, without recorded sound, and without motion pictures. Life was carried by the rhythms of daylight and darkness. And yet, within that quiet age, a boy arrived who would one day change the very nature of night and day. Edison was the youngest of 7 children in a family of modest means. His father Samuel was of Dutch descent, an ambitious man who tried various trades and business ventures, while his mother Nancy was a schoolteacher who left a lasting mark on her son. Thomas, often called Al by his family, was not a child who fit easily into the classroom. From an early age he was endlessly curious, always asking questions, often distracted, and never content with simple answers. In fact, at the age of 7, his teacher considered him addled, or slow, because he did not follow lessons in the usual way. His mother, however, saw something very different. Believing deeply in her son's potential, Nancy withdrew him from school and chose to teach him at home. This decision would shape the rest of his life, for she nurtured his curiosity rather than stifled it. Under her care, Thomas devoured books on science, history, and mechanics, building his foundation of knowledge outside the rigid structure of formal schooling. One of the earlier signs of his inventive spirit appeared when he was still a boy. Fascinated by how things worked, he set up a small chemistry laboratory in the basement of his family's home. He collected bottles, chemicals, and scraps of equipment, and soon the basement was filled with odd smells and small experiments that sometimes worried his parents. Though accidents were frequent, his determination to learn by trial and error never faded. Edison's early life was not only about books and experiments. From the age of 12, he began working to support himself. He took a job as a newsboy on the Grand Trunk Railroad line, selling newspapers and candy to passengers. This role was more than just a way to earn money. It was his first real taste of independence. The railroad became his moving classroom, where he observed the hustle of passengers, the technology of locomotives, and the constant pulse of modern life. He even convinced the train staff to allow him a small space in the baggage car, where he set up both a printing press and a tiny laboratory. There, between stops, he published his own newspaper, the Grand Trunk Herald, and continued his chemical experiments. This mix of business and invention foreshadowed the balance he would later maintain throughout his career. One dramatic event during these years showed another side of his character. One day, Edison risked his own safety to save the life of a young boy who wandered onto the tracks in front of an oncoming train. The boy's father, a grateful station agent, rewarded Thomas by teaching him how to operate a telegraph. This skill would change the course of Edison's life. The telegraph was one of the marvels of the mid-19th century, a machine that carried messages almost instantly across great distances. For young Edison, it was both a livelihood and a doorway into the world of electrical science. He quickly became skilled in telegraphy, and by his late teens he was working as a telegraph operator in various cities. Yet even as he tapped out messages for others, he dreamed of improving the devices he worked with. Every night after his shifts he experimented, tinkered, and imagined better ways to transmit signals. Edison's youth was filled with long hours, small failures, and gradual progress. But it was also filled with an inner drive that never seemed to tire. Where others saw limitations, he saw possibilities waiting to be discovered. From the boy in the basement laboratory to the teenager at the telegraph key, Thomas Edison was already shaping the restless mind that would later gift the world its light. As Thomas Edison moved into his teenage years, his life became increasingly tied to the sound of the telegraph key. The rhythmic clicks of dots and dashes filled his nights, and while others treated the work as routine, Edison treated it as a puzzle waiting to be solved. Each message sent across wires represented a marvel of human ingenuity, and he began to wonder how much further such technologies could go. Working long shifts as a telegraph operator was demanding, but it gave him something priceless: time with machines. Whenever he had a spare moment, Edison would take apart the instruments in front of him, studying their construction, adjusting their parts, and imagining improvements. This habit of disassembling and rebuilding became one of his trademarks. He rarely accepted a machine as finished. Instead, he saw every device as only the first draft of what it might become. His natural curiosity was matched by a willingness to work through endless trials. Failure, to Edison, was simply another step towards success. This mindset separated him from many of his colleagues who were content to master the skill of telegraphy without asking deeper questions. Edison's restlessness often meant he moved from city to city, following opportunities as a telegraph operator. Each new place gave him a different perspective on how communication shaped business and daily life. Railroads depended on the telegraph, newspapers relied on it for fast reporting, and families used it to stay connected across long distances. Edison realized he was working at the heart of a revolution, one that showed how invisible signals could shrink the world. But the constant travel also taught him about independence. He learned to adapt quickly, to rely on his own abilities, and to accept uncertainty as part of life. Even when money was scarce and accommodations were rough, his mind stayed fixed on invention. During these years, Edison began to produce small improvements of his own. He experimented with ways to send multiple messages over a single wire, a challenge that fascinated many inventors of the era. Though his early trials did not achieve commercial success, they revealed his persistence. He was not discouraged by obstacles. Instead, he grew more determined to refine his methods until they worked. One of the lessons Edison absorbed during his telegraph years was the importance of practical usefulness. He understood that an invention was not just about clever design, but about solving a real problem. If a device could make life easier, faster, or more efficient, it had value. This insight would later guide him as he built not only inventions but entire industries. By the time Edison was in his early 20s, he had gained a reputation among fellow operators as someone with unusual energy and vision. He often stayed awake through the night, tinkering at his workbench, chasing ideas that seemed to come without end. The quiet hours of darkness, when most of the world slept, became his most creative time. His life was not glamorous, but it was filled with purpose. Every click of the telegraph was a reminder that he was connected to something larger than himself, a growing network of communication that hinted at the vast possibilities of electricity. Slowly, Edison was preparing for the leap that would carry him from a skilled operator to a recognized inventor. By the early 1870s, Thomas Edison had moved beyond the life of a traveling telegraph operator and begun to establish himself as a professional inventor. His restless experiments with the telegraph had already caught the attention of people who recognized his unusual talent. He was no longer content simply to send messages. He wanted to redesign the very instruments that made communication possible. In Boston, one of the country's centers of innovation, Edison found both opportunity and challenge. The city was alive with ideas, and laboratories buzzed with new attempts at harnessing electricity. Yet Edison stood out because of his practical approach. He believed that inventions must not only be clever, but also affordable and reliable enough to serve everyday needs. This philosophy guided his work from the start. One of his earliest major successes came with improvements to the stock ticker, a device used by businesses to receive updates from the financial markets. At the time, the existing machines were unreliable, often breaking down or transmitting errors that could cost companies serious money. Edison studied the mechanism closely, then introduced refinements that made the ticker faster and more dependable. His improved model gained quick acceptance, and before long he had sold the rights for an impressive sum, enough to establish his own laboratory. For a young man who had once sold newspapers on a train, it was a turning point. With this success, Edison set up a workshop in Newark, New Jersey. The facility became a hive of activity, where he and a growing team of assistants worked long hours on multiple projects. Unlike the solitary inventors of legend, Edison thrived in a collaborative environment. He believed in assembling bright minds and dividing tasks, creating what some later called the first modern research and development laboratory. The workshop atmosphere was intense but also exciting. Tables overflowed with wires, batteries, tools, and experimental devices. Assistants hurried from station to station, carrying notes and parts, while Edison moved among them, asking questions, offering suggestions, and pushing for results. The workdays often stretched late into the night, yet fatigue rarely slowed him down. He was driven by an inner energy that seemed inexhaustible. Among the projects explored in Newark was the development of a system to send two messages simultaneously on a single telegraph wire, an idea known as the duplex telegraph. Competing inventors had tried and failed, but Edison's method showed real promise. His design attracted attention from Western Union, the powerful company that dominated telegraphy. Although negotiations were complicated, the very fact that Edison was dealing with such a major corporation proved how far he had come. Beyond specific inventions, these years were critical because they revealed Edison's way of thinking. He saw invention not as a single flash of inspiration, but as a process, a combination of observation, repeated trials, and stubborn persistence. Each small failure taught him something new. Each partial success brought him closer to the goal. His colleagues sometimes found his pace overwhelming, but they could not deny his vision. For Edison, Newark was just the beginning. The world was full of unsolved problems, and he was determined to confront them one by one. By the mid-1870s, Edison's growing reputation as an inventor began to spread beyond local circles. What made him remarkable was not only his skill with machinery, but his ability to spot opportunities where others saw limitations. He did not chase every idea. He looked for problems that touched ordinary life and then sought practical solutions. This mindset soon led him to create one of the most significant inventions of the era, the phonograph. The inspiration for the phonograph came while Edison was working on ways to improve the telegraph and telephone. He wondered if the vibrations of sound could be captured and reproduced, much as electrical signals were sent along wires. In 1877, after weeks of tinkering, he built a simple device consisting of a tinfoil-covered cylinder, a stylus, and a hand crank. To his assistant's astonishment, when Edison spoke into the mouthpiece and turned the handle, the machine repeated his words. The first phrase it played back was the now famous "Mary had a little lamb." For the first time in history, the human voice had been recorded and replayed. The phonograph was greeted with amazement. Newspapers called Edison the Wizard of Menlo Park, a nickname that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Crowds gathered to witness the talking machine, and for many people it seemed like pure magic. The idea that sound could be preserved and heard again was almost beyond belief. Yet for Edison, it was simply the result of careful reasoning and persistent trial. He quickly filed for patents and began demonstrating the device across the country. Though the first version was crude and fragile, it opened a door that no one had imagined. For Edison, the phonograph revealed the power of invention to astonish as well as to serve. At Menlo Park, his new research laboratory in New Jersey, Edison and his team expanded their work. This facility was larger and more organized than his previous workshop, designed to handle multiple experiments at once. It was here that Edison's vision of collaborative invention reached its full form. Dozens of assistants worked under his guidance, tackling projects from improved batteries to electric lighting. The lab never truly slept. Lights burned through the night, and the steady hum of experiments created an atmosphere of tireless progress. Edison himself set the pace, often working for days on little sleep, pushing ahead with unshakable determination. The phonograph was only the beginning. While the public marvelled at the talking machine, Edison was already turning his mind toward an even greater challenge, creating a safe, reliable and affordable electric light. The world still lived by gas lamps and candles, and though others had experimented with electric illumination, no one had yet made it practical for widespread use. Edison believed he could, and he devoted himself to solving the problem. This decision marked the start of the project that would define his legacy and truly bring light to the world. The quest for electric light became the defining challenge of Thomas Edison's career. By the late 1870s, gas lamps illuminated city streets, homes relied on oil lanterns, and darkness still dictated much of human activity. Scientists had experimented with electric lamps for decades, but none had produced a system that was practical, safe, and affordable for everyday use. Edison approached the problem not simply as a matter of invention, but as the creation of an entire system. He understood that producing a light bulb was only part of the solution. What people needed was a way to deliver electricity into homes and businesses reliably, much like gas was already supplied through pipes. This insight showed his rare ability to think in terms of networks, not just individual devices. At Menlo Park, Edison and his team began experimenting with filaments, the thin wires that glowed when electric current passed through them. Early attempts used materials like platinum, which produced light but were expensive and short-lived. Edison believed the answer lay in discovering a filament that could glow brightly, resist burning out, and be made at low cost. He and his assistants tested hundreds of substances: cotton thread, paper treated with chemicals, various metals, even plant fibers. The laboratory became a place of endless trials, with filaments glowing and failing, breaking or burning away. Yet each failure brought them closer to success. Edison often remarked that he had not failed, but had found many ways that did not work. His persistence became legendary, inspiring stories that circulated even in his own lifetime. Finally, in October 1879, Edison achieved a breakthrough. After experimenting with carbonized bamboo fiber, he created a filament that glowed steadily for more than 40 hours. This result, though modest by today's standards, was revolutionary. For the first time, a light bulb produced dependable illumination that could realistically replace candles and gas lamps. Edison's team refined the design further, and soon bulbs could last for hundreds of hours. But Edison knew that the bulb alone was not enough. He began developing the infrastructure needed to deliver electricity: generators, wiring systems, meters, and safety features. His vision was to create a complete electrical grid capable of powering entire neighborhoods. This bold approach set him apart from others who had focused narrowly on lamp design. When Edison finally unveiled his electric lighting system to the public, the response was one of awe. Crowds gathered to see streets and buildings illuminated with a steady, gentle glow that seemed almost miraculous. Newspapers reported the demonstrations in excited detail, and investors quickly recognized the potential. The success of the electric light not only transformed Edison into a household name, but also marked the beginning of a new era for the modern world. Night would never again belong fully to darkness. With the invention of a working light bulb, Edison faced the equally daunting task of convincing the world that electric lighting could be trusted. Many people were cautious, even fearful, of this invisible force called electricity. Gaslighting had been the standard for decades, and though imperfect, it was familiar. Electricity, on the other hand, seemed mysterious and even dangerous. Edison knew that winning public confidence was as important as the invention itself. To achieve this, he organized carefully planned demonstrations. In December 1879, he invited reporters and investors to Menlo Park to witness the miracle of electric illumination. That night, the laboratory grounds were bathed in a steady white glow as dozens of bulbs lit up the darkness. Visitors walked among the glowing lamps with wonder, noting how clean and bright the light appeared compared to smoky gas flames. The press quickly spread word of the event, calling it a vision of the future. These demonstrations were more than showmanship, they were strategy. Edison understood that for electric lighting to succeed, people had to see it with their own eyes. Soon, similar displays took place in cities, drawing crowds who marvelled at streets transformed by gentle, unwavering light. Investors responded with enthusiasm, and plans for commercial systems moved forward rapidly. In 1882, Edison achieved another milestone by launching the Pearl Street Station in New York City. This facility was the first central power plant in the United States, built to supply electricity to customers in Lower Manhattan. Massive steam engines powered generators, which sent current through underground wires to homes and businesses. When the system was switched on, about 400 lamps in the district came to life, glowing steadily and safely. For those who witnessed it, the sight was unforgettable. What had once seemed a bold dream was now a functioning reality. The Pearl Street Station demonstrated that Edison's vision extended beyond invention into infrastructure. He had created not just a light bulb, but a model for modern power distribution that would spread across the globe. The success also brought new challenges. Maintaining the system required constant attention, from repairing equipment to expanding coverage. Yet Edison's determination never faltered. He often walked the streets himself, checking wires and listening to customer feedback. He wanted to understand firsthand how his invention was serving the people. By the mid-1880s, electric lighting was no longer a novelty but a growing industry. Cities across America and soon across Europe began adopting the system. Factories, theatres, hotels and private homes glowed with bulbs that symbolized progress and modernity. Nightlife expanded, productivity increased, and the rhythm of daily life shifted. Darkness was no longer an immovable boundary. It was simply another part of the day waiting to be lit. For Edison, this triumph confirmed his belief that invention was only complete when it entered everyday life. The world was stepping into a new age, and his light had shown the way. While Edison's electric light transformed the world, his laboratory at Menlo Park continued to pulse with activity. For Edison, one success was never enough. Each achievement only opened the door to new challenges. Surrounded by a team of skilled assistants, he pushed forward on dozens of projects simultaneously. The Menlo Park lab became famous as a place where invention seemed to happen daily, where wires, glass, and chemicals came together to produce marvels. Among the many pursuits, Edison remained fascinated with the phonograph. Although the first version had dazzled the public, it was fragile and impractical for regular use. Determined to improve it, Edison explored better recording surfaces and sturdier mechanisms. He envisioned a future where voices, speeches, and even music could be preserved and replayed with clarity. This vision was remarkable for a time when most people had never heard sound outside of live performance. Edison's dream of recorded sound hinted at the birth of entirely new industries, though few realized it then. Beyond the phonograph, Edison's lab also explored improvements in telegraphy and the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the telephone in 1876 had astonished the world, and Edison sought ways to enhance it. He worked on devices to make voices louder and clearer, experimenting with carbon transmitters that eventually became widely adopted. His contributions helped transform the telephone from a novelty into a reliable tool for communication. What set Edison apart was his systematic approach. At Menlo Park, he organized invention like a factory. Instead of relying solely on moments of inspiration, he believed in steady labor, trial after trial, refining each idea until it was practical. Assistants often remarked on his stamina. He could spend 40 hours awake, moving from bench to bench, adjusting apparatus, sketching designs, and urging his team forward. Sleep came only when exhaustion left no choice. Yet for all his intensity, there was joy in his work. Edison once said he never worked a day in his life, because it was all play. The sense of discovery kept him energized, even when experiments failed repeatedly. Visitors to Menlo Park were struck by the atmosphere. The lab, lit late into the night by the very bulbs Edison had invented, seemed alive with promise. Journalists described it as a place of wonder, and stories about the Wizard of Menlo Park spread widely. Children read about him in newspapers, adults debated his projects in parlours, and investors kept a close watch on his progress. Edison had become more than an inventor. He was a symbol of American ingenuity, the embodiment of progress through persistence. Still, behind the fame was a man driven not by applause, but by a relentless curiosity. For him, the lab was less a workplace than a playground of ideas, where every day brought the possibility of reshaping the future. By the mid-1880s, Thomas Edison was no longer just an inventor, but the head of a rapidly expanding enterprise. His electric lighting system had begun to spread through major cities, and demand was growing faster than his team could keep up. To manage this, Edison organized companies devoted to producing equipment, installing wiring, and operating power stations. What had started as a dream in his lab was becoming a global industry. Edison's role shifted during this period. Though he still loved experimenting, he now had to oversee large operations, negotiate with investors, and handle legal battles over patents. Rival inventors and companies challenged his claims, arguing that electric lighting was the product of many minds, not just one. Courts and business meetings became as much a part of Edison's life as the laboratory bench. Still, his determination never wavered. He defended his ideas fiercely, often appearing in person to explain the technical details of his inventions. Despite the challenges, Edison continued to innovate. He worked on improving power generation, designing larger dynamos capable of supplying electricity to broader areas. He also experimented with underground wiring systems to reduce hazards and keep streets uncluttered. Each improvement made the technology more reliable and attractive to customers. By 1887, Edison recognized the need for a new facility that could handle the increasing scale of his work. He established a laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey, much larger and better equipped than Menlo Park. The new complex included machine shops, chemistry labs, a library, and space for hundreds of workers. It became a centre of invention unmatched anywhere in the world. At West Orange, Edison supervised projects ranging from sound recording to motion pictures. The environment was intense but inspiring. Workers described long hours and demanding expectations, yet many felt privileged to contribute to history in the making. The laboratory produced a steady stream of patents, each building on Edison's vision of shaping modern life. Though business pressures weighed heavily, Edison's passion for invention remained unchanged. He often retreated into quiet corners of the lab to test a new idea, losing track of time as he tinkered with wires, chemicals, or drawings. His assistants recalled how his face lit up whenever an experiment showed promise, as if the world itself had opened a new door. The West Orange years marked a transition from Edison as a lone wizard to Edison as a leader of industrial research. The scale of his operations reflected the growing complexity of the modern age, where invention required not only brilliance but organisation and persistence. The man who had once sold newspapers on trains was now guiding teams that shaped the very rhythm of daily life. The West Orange Laboratory soon became the stage for some of Edison's most ambitious projects. Among them was the motion picture. The idea of capturing moving images had fascinated inventors for years, but no one had yet found a practical way to record and display them. Edison, inspired by the success of his phonograph, believed that if sound could be preserved, then perhaps images could be as well. In 1888, after discussions with photographer Edward Muybridge, Edison directed his staff to begin experimenting with devices that could record motion. He envisioned a machine that would do for the eye what the phonograph had done for the ear. To carry out this vision, Edison relied heavily on his assistant William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, a talented engineer and photographer. Together they developed the kinetoscope, a peephole viewing device that allowed a single person at a time to watch short films. Using strips of celluloid film, the machine presented a sequence of images fast enough to create the illusion of movement. Though simple by later standards, it was revolutionary. The first public demonstrations of the kinetoscope in the early 1890s created excitement and curiosity. People paid to watch short clips of dancers, boxers, or ordinary street scenes. For audiences of the time, the moving picture seemed like magic, a window into another world. Edison quickly realized the commercial potential and began producing films at a small studio built near the laboratory, often called the Black Maria. It was a strange, tar paper-covered building with a roof that opened to let in sunlight. The studio could even rotate on a track to follow the sun, ensuring proper lighting for the films. Actors, performers, and ordinary workers appeared in front of the camera, creating brief but captivating moments that delighted audiences. While Edison's company introduced motion pictures to the public, competition soon emerged. Other inventors in America and abroad were also working on ways to project films onto large screens, making them accessible to groups rather than just individuals. Edison's focus on the peephole model left him at a disadvantage as cinema moved toward collective experiences. Still, his role in launching the industry was undeniable. He had helped turn a scientific curiosity into a popular form of entertainment. The rise of motion pictures revealed another aspect of Edison's character, his ability to sense cultural as well as technical possibilities. He understood that invention was not only about solving problems, but also about shaping imagination. By giving people moving images, he opened new ways to share stories, preserve memories, and experience life beyond their immediate surroundings. The kinetoscope era may have been brief, but it marked the beginning of a global industry that would transform art, entertainment, and communication. For Edison, it was one more step in his lifelong journey of bringing light, sound, and vision into the modern age. While the world celebrated Edison as a wizard of invention, his daily life at the West Orange complex was anything but glamorous. The laboratory was a place of relentless effort, filled with the constant clatter of machines, the smell of chemicals, and the hum of generators. Assistants worked from early morning until late at night, often pushing through exhaustion, driven by Edison's tireless pace. He set an example by working alongside them, sometimes going days with only brief naps, his mind always racing toward the next discovery. Edison's philosophy was simple. Progress came from persistence. He often reminded his team that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. This saying, repeated countless times, captured his belief that steady, determined effort was far more important than sudden flashes of brilliance. His approach was not about waiting for ideas, but about chasing them through endless experiments until one finally succeeded. The lab produced a steady flow of new developments. Edison worked on better storage batteries, improvements to telegraphs and telephones, and chemical processes for refining materials. Some projects succeeded and entered the market, while others failed quietly, leaving behind only notes and broken prototypes. Yet Edison never saw failure as wasted effort. Each attempt revealed information that could be used in future work. To him, the path to invention was built from thousands of discarded trials. Visitors who toured the West Orange laboratory were often struck by the scale of activity. The main building contained long work benches crowded with glass tubes, copper wires, and sketches pinned to walls. Specialized rooms housed equipment for chemistry, metallurgy, and mechanics. Outside stood machine shops where parts could be cast, shaped, and assembled without delay. Edison's insistence on having every resource at hand made the laboratory nearly self-sufficient. He could dream of a device in the morning and have parts for it manufactured by evening. Despite his growing fame, Edison remained a practical man. He dressed plainly, avoided unnecessary luxury, and focused his energy on work. Interviews with journalists often revealed his straightforward manner, his preference for results over theory, and his conviction that invention should serve society. He believed technology should be useful to ordinary people, not just to scientists or wealthy elites. This outlook helped him maintain public trust even when critics accused him of being overly competitive or controlling. Yet life at the laboratory was not without strain. The pace wore heavily on his assistants, some of whom left after years of grueling schedules. Legal disputes with rivals consumed time and resources. Even within his own companies, disagreements over direction and financing created tension. Still, Edison pressed forward, fueled by an inner drive that seemed unshakable. For him, each sunrise was another chance to test an idea that might change the world. By the late 1880s, Edison's fame had spread across the globe. Newspapers described him as the man who had conquered darkness, and visitors from Europe and America flocked to West Orange to see the laboratory where wonders were born. His reputation as the Wizard of Menlo Park had evolved into something larger. He was now seen as the face of modern invention itself. Yet behind the acclaim, Edison faced a new and formidable challenge: competition. Other inventors, inspired by the success of electric lighting, rushed to develop their own systems. Chief among them was George Westinghouse, who championed alternating current, or AC, as the future of power distribution. Edison, on the other hand, was deeply committed to direct current, or DC, which he had built his entire system around. The difference between the two was technical but crucial. DC provided steady voltage and worked well for short distances, but it required power stations to be close to customers. AC, meanwhile, could be transmitted over much longer distances using transformers, making it potentially more practical for wide networks. Edison was convinced that DC was safer and more reliable, while AC carried risks he believed would endanger the public. Thus began what history remembers as the War of Currents. Edison fought fiercely to defend his system. He launched public demonstrations showing the dangers of AC, sometimes in ways that shocked audiences. Newspapers reported on his warnings, and debates raged in both scientific circles and city councils. Investors, engineers, and politicians all took sides, knowing that the outcome would shape the future of electricity. The rivalry between Edison and Westinghouse was intense, and at times bitter. Each sought to win contracts for lighting cities, factories, and transportation systems. For Edison, the struggle was not only about technology, but also about reputation. Having devoted years to building his DC network, he felt personally tied to its success. He could not easily accept that another system might surpass his own. Yet as the 1890s approached, the advantages of AC became harder to ignore. Westinghouse's system proved effective in powering large regions, and major contracts soon shifted in his favour. Edison's companies continued to expand, but the tide of history was turning. The War of Currents revealed both Edison's strengths and his limits. His determination and loyalty to his ideas were admirable, but they also made him resistant to change. Still, even in defeat, his work had laid the foundation for the electrical age. The very debate over AC and DC accelerated progress, forcing engineers to refine safety standards, improve equipment, and expand infrastructure. Though Edison did not win this particular battle, his role in bringing electricity into daily life remained undeniable. He had illuminated the path forward, even if others would carry it further. After the storm of the War of Currents, Edison shifted his focus to new areas where his inventive energy could flourish. Though alternating current eventually became the dominant system, Edison's contributions to the infrastructure of electric power remained essential. Rather than dwell on the setback, he turned his attention toward other fields of discovery, proving once again that his creativity knew no single boundary. One of his greatest interests during the 1890s was storage batteries. He believed that efficient, rechargeable batteries could change industries, particularly transportation. Electric-powered streetcars, automobiles, and even small ships fascinated him. If a dependable battery could be created, he imagined cities with cleaner air and quieter streets, free from the smoke of coal and the noise of engines. Developing such a battery, however, proved incredibly difficult. Edison and his team experimented with thousands of chemical combinations, testing different metals, solutions, and designs. Failures piled up, but Edison refused to abandon the project. He often said that finding 10,000 ways that did not work was not discouraging but informative. Each failure narrowed the path toward success. His persistence eventually led to the nickel-iron storage battery, which, though not perfect, became useful in certain applications and demonstrated his relentless pursuit of improvement. Around the same time, Edison's attention also turned to cement manufacturing. It may have seemed far removed from light bulbs or phonographs, but Edison saw opportunities everywhere. He developed processes to make cement more efficiently, and even proposed building entire houses from it, envisioning affordable homes for ordinary families. While his cement houses never became widespread, his innovations improved production methods and influenced the industry. Motion pictures also continued to occupy Edison's laboratory. The Black Maria studio produced a steady stream of short films, from acrobats and vaudeville performers to reenactments of famous events. Though Edison did not fully embrace projection technology, which soon allowed movies to be shown to large audiences, his early work had set the stage for the new art form. Film companies around the world built upon the foundation he had created. During these years, Edison's role as a cultural figure grew alongside his scientific achievements. He was invited to world fairs and exhibitions, where his inventions were displayed as symbols of progress. Crowds marveled at the electric lights, phonographs, and moving pictures, seeing in them the promise of a modern age. Edison himself remained modest in appearance, often dressed simply and speaking plainly, yet he understood the importance of public confidence. He wanted ordinary people to feel that technology was their ally, not something distant or frightening. By the end of the century, Edison had secured his place as one of the most influential figures of the age. Even when individual projects struggled, his larger impact was undeniable. He had changed how people lived, worked, and even dreamed. As the 20th century dawned, Edison remained deeply involved in both invention and industry. Though already a legendary figure, he refused to slow his pace. Each morning he walked into the West Orange complex with the same restless energy he had shown decades earlier. Assistants sometimes remark that his curiosity seemed untouched by age, as if every problem was a new adventure. Yet the world around him was changing quickly. New scientific discoveries were reshaping physics, chemistry, and engineering. Younger inventors and entrepreneurs were entering the field, eager to make their mark. Rather than retreat, Edison adapted by broadening the scope of his projects. His nickel-iron storage battery continued to occupy much of his time. He believed strongly in its potential for transportation, particularly for electric vehicles. At the turn of the century, cars powered by electricity competed with those fueled by gasoline or steam. Edison envisioned a future where silent, clean electric cars would dominate city streets. He partnered with manufacturers, most notably Henry Ford, who admired Edison deeply. Ford even credited Edison's encouragement with inspiring him to pursue his dream of creating affordable automobiles. Though Edison's batteries were not powerful enough to secure victory in the automotive race, his influence on Ford and others left a lasting mark. The friendship between Edison and Ford grew into one of mutual respect. They often spent time together, discussing ideas, testing vehicles, and imagining the future of transportation. Their bond symbolized the connection between two eras of innovation: Edison, the master of electricity, and Ford, the pioneer of mass production. Beyond transportation, Edison also explored improvements in mining. He developed techniques to process low-grade iron ore, hoping to make use of resources previously considered waste. Large plants were built to test his methods, complete with powerful machinery of his own design. For a time, it seemed promising, but in the end the venture proved uneconomical. Edison accepted the failure without bitterness, noting that every effort added to knowledge, even if profits did not follow. He often reminded his team that success was never guaranteed, but persistence was always worthwhile. These experiments reflected Edison's lifelong willingness to step into unfamiliar fields. Unlike many inventors who specialized narrowly, he moved from light to sound, from film to cement, from ore processing to batteries, always searching for practical improvements. Some ventures succeeded spectacularly, others faded quietly, but all carried the imprint of his determination. As the new century progressed, Edison became more than an inventor. He was a public figure whose opinions were sought on matters of science, industry, and education. Journalists quoted his views on the future, educators invited him to speak, and citizens admired him as proof of what persistence could achieve. He embodied the spirit of modern America, energetic, inventive, and always moving forward. Despite his fame and accomplishments, Edison's personal life was marked by both joy and hardship. In 1871, he married Mary Stilwell, a young woman he had met when she worked at one of his companies. Their life together was brief but filled with warmth. They had 3 children, Marion, nicknamed Dot, Thomas Jr., nicknamed Dash, and William. Edison's devotion to work, however, often kept him away from home, and Mary struggled with the demands of managing family life. Tragically, she died in 1884 at the age of 29, leaving Edison a widower with 3 young children. The loss weighed heavily on him, though he expressed his grief more through silence and work than words. 2 years later, Edison remarried. His second wife, Mina Miller, was the daughter of an Ohio inventor and industrialist. Intelligent and gracious, Mina brought stability to Edison's home life. Together they had 3 more children, Charles, Madeline, and Theodore. The family lived at Glenmont, a large estate in New Jersey that contrasted sharply with Edison's modest beginnings. Though the house was grand, Edison himself remained simple in his habits. He often preferred the laboratory to social gatherings, and Mina frequently reminded him to rest or join the family for meals. Life at Glenmont revealed a softer side of Edison. He enjoyed walking the grounds, tending to plants, and occasionally playing with his children, though work was never far from his mind. His notebooks sometimes contained both experimental notes and reminders about family matters, showing how deeply intertwined the 2 worlds were. His children grew up in the shadow of his fame. Some, like Charles, later took on roles in business and public service, while others struggled under the weight of comparison to their famous father. Edison cared for them deeply, but could be demanding, expecting discipline and curiosity in equal measure. Beyond family, Edison maintained friendships with other prominent figures of his time. He corresponded with businessmen, scientists, and politicians, offering advice and exchanging ideas. His circle included people like Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and naturalist John Burroughs, with whom he sometimes travelled or vacationed. These friendships gave him moments of relaxation away from the intensity of the laboratory. Yet even in leisure, Edison's mind remained active. He would jot down observations about plants, machinery, or conversations, always searching for inspiration. Publicly, Edison was admired not only for his inventions, but also for his work ethic and resilience. Stories about his persistence circulated widely, inspiring countless young readers. He became a symbol of American determination, a man who rose from humble beginnings to reshape the modern world. At home, however, he was more complex, brilliant, restless, sometimes absent, yet deeply human. His family's support allowed him to continue the relentless pace of his career, balancing the demands of genius with the responsibilities of daily life. As Edison's career advanced into the early 20th century, he found himself increasingly celebrated as a living legend. Newspapers referred to him as the greatest inventor of the age, and his name became known in households across America and abroad. Yet despite the praise, Edison remained firmly committed to the practical side of invention. He often reminded journalists and admirers that his purpose was not magic but hard work, not miracles but persistence. His laboratory continued to be a place of ceaseless experimentation. One of the most significant undertakings of this era was his ongoing development of storage batteries. Edison's nickel-iron design showed promise, and he was determined to perfect it. Railroads expressed interest in using batteries for signal systems, while manufacturers looked for portable power sources. Edison promoted the idea of electric delivery vehicles and even tested buses powered by his batteries. Though gasoline engines soon became dominant, Edison's efforts foreshadowed the importance of electric power in transportation, a vision realized long after his lifetime. His influence extended into business and policy as well. Edison was asked to serve on committees, advise industrial leaders, and share his opinions about the future of technology. His straightforward style and reputation for honesty made him a trusted voice. When he spoke about the potential of electricity, communication, or education, people listened carefully. Yet Edison never saw himself as a philosopher. He preferred to speak from experience, grounding his predictions in years of trial and error. The public also saw Edison as a symbol of American opportunity. His story, rising from a curious boy with a little formal education to one of the most accomplished inventors in history, was often retold as an example of what persistence could achieve. Schools used him as a model to inspire students, and young inventors wrote letters seeking advice. Edison answered when he could, usually encouraging them to experiment, to work tirelessly, and to view failure as a teacher. Despite his towering reputation, Edison maintained simple habits. He often dressed plainly, avoided extravagance, and devoted most of his wealth to reinvesting in new ventures. He ate modest meals, worked long hours, and preferred the company of his laboratory to grand social events. His second wife, Mina, often balanced his public role with her own sense of duty, hosting gatherings at Glenmont and ensuring the family's presence in community life. By this stage, Edison's inventions had touched nearly every aspect of modern existence: light, sound, communication, and motion. Yet he viewed his life's work as unfinished. Each success only reminded him of the vast unknown still waiting to be explored. To him, invention was less about reaching a final destination than about continuing the journey, one experiment at a time. During the first decades of the 20th century, Edison's fame grew alongside his age, and he became something rare in history, a man who witnessed his own legend form while still alive. Crowds greeted him at public appearances, newspapers quoted his every word, and governments honoured him as a symbol of progress. Yet Edison himself never lost his focus on the workbench. Even as his hair turned white and his hearing declined, he could be found late at night in the West Orange laboratory, leaning over wires, batteries, or sketches. His curiosity remained unshaken. One of the notable projects of this period was his attempt to improve phonograph technology. The early machines had captivated audiences, but Edison sought to make them more durable, affordable, and capable of capturing richer sound. He introduced the Edison diamond disc, which produced clearer audio than earlier wax cylinders. For a time, these records competed with other formats and attracted loyal listeners. Though the market eventually favoured flat discs produced by rival companies, Edison's efforts helped shape the music industry. The phonograph became not just a novelty but a permanent fixture in homes, a source of entertainment and memory. Another area where Edison's influence continued was motion pictures. His company refined cameras and projectors, contributing to the rapid growth of cinema. However, the industry expanded so quickly that Edison sometimes struggled to keep pace with new competitors. Still, his early work had laid the foundation for one of the most powerful cultural forces of the 20th century. By this time, Edison was also a public advisor. Leaders sought his opinions on education, science, and even national policy. He was asked to comment on how schools should encourage creativity, how cities should adopt technology, and how governments might support innovation. Edison often stressed the importance of practical experience, urging young people to learn by doing rather than only by reading. His views reflected his own life. A boy who had left formal schooling early yet had achieved greatness through self-directed curiosity. At Glenmont, his family estate, Edison balanced public duties with private routines. He spent quiet evenings with Mina and their children, though his notebooks reveal that invention was never far from his thoughts. Walks in the garden often turned into moments of reflection about a technical challenge, and conversations at the dinner table sometimes circled back to batteries or light. Visitors to Glenmont were often struck by the contrast. The grandeur of the house, filled with guests and admiration, and the simple, restless man at its centre, still sketching ideas in the margins of letters. As Edison moved deeper into the 20th century, he carried with him both the weight of fame and the same relentless spirit that had guided him as a boy. To him, the journey of invention was endless, and the world remained full of mysteries waiting to be solved. As Edison entered his 60s, the world was racing into a new century of science and technology. Automobiles began to dominate city streets, airplanes tested the skies, and new discoveries in physics challenged long-held assumptions. Though Edison had already transformed daily life, he refused to rest on past achievements. He remained convinced that invention was a duty as much as a passion, a way to serve humanity while feeding his own boundless curiosity. One of his enduring projects during these years was the refinement of his nickel-iron storage battery. He believed it could power not only vehicles but also small factories, ships, and even homes. Despite setbacks and criticism, Edison pushed forward, investing years of effort and large sums of money. Though gasoline engines eventually won the automotive race, Edison's persistence in battery development demonstrated his foresight. Decades later, when electric cars returned to prominence, his vision appeared prophetic. His influence extended beyond the lab into friendships with other pioneers. His bond with Henry Ford deepened as Ford's automobile empire grew. Ford often credited Edison for encouraging him in the early days, when many doubted the practicality of cars for ordinary people. Together with tire magnate Harvey Firestone and naturalist John Burroughs, they formed a circle of friends known as the Vagabonds. The group often travelled together on camping trips, blending recreation with lively discussions about technology, nature, and the future. Photographs from these journeys show Edison seated beside campfires, surrounded by tents and motor cars, his eyes alert even in moments of rest. These excursions revealed a side of Edison that the public rarely saw. Away from the noise of laboratories and factories, he enjoyed the simplicity of outdoor life, listening to birds, studying plants, and sharing stories with companions. Yet even in the woods, his mind wandered back to experiments. He sometimes examined leaves or soil, wondering about chemical properties, or discussed ideas for improving farming techniques. His curiosity seemed boundless, touching every corner of human experience. Publicly, Edison continued to be celebrated. Expositions displayed his inventions, universities honoured him, and articles praised his resilience. Young inventors saw him as proof that persistence could overcome obstacles, while businessmen admired his ability to turn ideas into industries. Yet Edison remained modest in appearance, often downplaying his genius by emphasizing hard work. He insisted that success came from discipline, patience, and the willingness to learn from failure. By this stage, Edison's role had shifted from that of a daring inventor to that of a national elder, a guiding figure in an age of rapid change. Still, his restless energy persisted. Each morning he returned to the laboratory, surrounded by tools, notes, and assistants, eager to chase the next idea. To him, invention was not a chapter of life that closed with age, but a lifelong conversation with the mysteries of the world. The years of Edison's friendship with Ford, Firestone, and Burroughs became a cherished chapter in his later life. Their camping trips, often lasting weeks, attracted attention from newspapers, which sometimes followed the group into the countryside. Reporters dubbed them the Vagabonds, a playful name that captured both their adventurous spirit and their status as men of influence. Photographs showed their motorcars loaded with supplies, their tents pitched in fields, and campfires glowing at dusk. For Edison, who had spent decades surrounded by wires, glass, and machinery, these journeys into nature offered balance. He would rise early to watch the sunrise through the trees, take long walks, and examine plants with the curiosity of a scientist. Burroughs, the naturalist, delighted in explaining the habits of birds or the secrets of forests, and Edison listened with interest, often jotting notes or collecting samples. Even in the woods, his thoughts returned to invention. He speculated about new materials, wondered how chemistry could aid agriculture, and discussed with Ford ways to improve engines. The camping trips were not only recreation, but also moving laboratories of conversation. Yet they also revealed Edison's humanity. Around the campfire, he told stories of his youth, of working on trains and building his first laboratory in a basement. His laughter was loud, his presence magnetic, and his friends cherished these moments of ease. Away from business battles and endless experiments, Edison showed warmth and humour, qualities that balanced the intensity for which he was known. Back in West Orange, the laboratory continued to produce ideas. Edison directed efforts to find alternative sources of rubber, inspired by concerns over supply shortages. He led extensive research into plants that might yield usable latex. Fields near his estate were planted with goldenrod, a common weed that Edison believed could provide a domestic source of rubber. He experimented tirelessly, testing countless strains, boiling leaves, extracting fibres, and measuring resilience. Though the project never reached commercial success, it demonstrated Edison's willingness to tackle national problems with the same energy he devoted to light and sound. His reputation as a problem solver extended beyond invention. Politicians and business leaders often sought his advice, trusting his judgment on matters of industry and education. Edison rarely spoke in abstract terms. Instead, he stressed practical action. He believed progress came not from grand speeches, but from steady work, from experiments tested and refined. By the time he was in his 70s, Edison's health had begun to show signs of strain. His hearing, once sharp, had faded to near deafness, forcing him to rely on lip reading and written notes. Yet even this limitation did not slow his mind. He remained a fixture at the laboratory, guiding projects, encouraging younger inventors, and reminding everyone that curiosity was the fuel of discovery. By the second decade of the 20th century, Edison had become more than an inventor. He was a national icon. His image appeared in magazines, his sayings were quoted in classrooms, and his life story was used to inspire students across America. Schools emphasized his persistence, pointing to his thousands of experiments as proof that failure was only a step toward success. For many, Edison represented the ideal of American ingenuity, the self-made man who rose from humble beginnings to shape the modern age. Yet behind the public image, Edison's daily life was still defined by discipline and work. At West Orange, the laboratory continued to hum with activity, producing patents and prototypes. Edison's presence was everywhere, in the design rooms, the machine shops, the testing areas. Though he could no longer hear well, he compensated with sharp observation. Assistants described how he watched their work closely, reading expressions and gestures to understand results. His questions were pointed, his suggestions practical, and his expectations high. One of the most ambitious projects of these years was his work on domestic rubber production. The United States depended heavily on imported rubber, a vulnerability that worried both industry and government. Edison took up the challenge with characteristic energy. Goldenrod became his focus. This tall plant, common across fields and roadsides, produced a form of latex that Edison believed could be refined into usable rubber. He crossbred plants to increase their yield, built extraction facilities, and tested the material for durability. Though commercial results were limited, his efforts contributed valuable knowledge to agricultural science and showed his willingness to apply invention to national needs. Beyond the lab, Edison remained a close friend to Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone. Together they discussed ways to strengthen American industry, reduce dependence on imports, and encourage innovation. Their conversations, whether in boardrooms or around campfires, blended technical details with visions of the future. Edison's role in these exchanges was both mentor and partner, respected for his wisdom and admired for his unrelenting curiosity. Public recognition also grew. Universities awarded him honorary degrees, organizations presented medals, and newspapers reported his birthdays as if they were national events. Yet Edison often brushed aside the honors, preferring to return quickly to his experiments. Fame, to him, was secondary. The true reward was discovery itself. At Glenmont, his family supported him through the demands of public life. Mina managed social duties, while their children pursued studies and careers. Edison found comfort in evening walks around the estate, though his thoughts often drifted back to experiments waiting on his workbench. Even as the world hailed him as a legend, he remained at heart, a man absorbed by the simple joy of turning ideas into reality. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 brought new responsibilities to Thomas Edison. Though well into his 60s, he was asked by the US government to lend his expertise to national defense. President Woodrow Wilson invited him to head the Naval Consulting Board, a group formed to gather ideas for improving military technology. Edison accepted, though he insisted that his role would be limited to defensive rather than offensive inventions. He believed strongly that science should be used to protect rather than to destroy. Under his guidance, the board reviewed thousands of proposals from inventors across the country. Many were impractical, but others showed promise. Edison himself worked on projects such as submarine detection, improving periscopes, and refining torpedo technology. His most notable contributions involved sound detection, where his experiments with underwater listening devices laid groundwork for future sonar systems. Though not all of his wartime efforts succeeded, his dedication reflected his belief that invention must serve society in times of need. The war years also deepened Edison's reputation as a patriot. Newspapers praised his willingness to contribute, and his image as the nation's inventor grew stronger. Crowds gathered to hear him speak at public events, where he often emphasized resilience, hard work, and the importance of science in securing the future. His presence reassured people that American ingenuity could meet any challenge. At the same time, Edison's personal projects continued. He still pursued improvements in storage batteries, convinced they would one day revolutionize transportation. He also maintained his interest in phonographs, refining designs even as new competitors entered the market. Though the world was changing rapidly, Edison's persistence anchored him. For his assistants, the wartime years brought no relief from the relentless pace of the laboratory. Workdays remained long, experiments constant, and Edison's expectations high. His ability to focus was legendary. While others grew distracted by the turmoil of global conflict, Edison immersed himself in the rhythm of trial and error. He found comfort in the steady pursuit of solutions, no matter how small. After the war ended, Edison reflected on the experience with characteristic humility. He downplayed his role, noting that many projects had not reached full success. Yet his efforts had pushed forward areas of research that would prove vital in years to come. More importantly, his leadership had demonstrated how science and invention could unite a nation in uncertain times. For Edison, the war was a reminder that invention was not only about profit or fame, but also about responsibility. To him, every tool created carried the weight of how it would shape human life. Even in the twilight of his career, he held to that principle firmly, never losing sight of the connection between discovery and duty. After the First World War, Edison returned to civilian life with the same tireless drive that had marked every stage of his career. Though in his 70s, he still arrived at the West Orange laboratory each day, notebook in hand, ready to tackle new problems. Age had slowed his step, but not his determination. Assistants often found him bent over workbenches, sketching ideas or asking sharp questions about experiments in progress. His hearing loss forced him to rely heavily on lip reading and written notes, yet his mind remained as restless as ever. One of his major post-war pursuits was the search for domestic sources of raw materials. Edison worried about America's dependence on imports, especially for strategic resources like rubber, chemicals, and metals. His experiments with goldenrod plants for rubber extraction continued, with fields near his estate dedicated to breeding taller, stronger varieties. He built machinery to process the latex and tested it for durability. Although large-scale success eluded him, his work contributed knowledge that later researchers built upon. At the same time, Edison revisited older inventions, striving to refine them. He continued to adjust phonograph technology, convinced that sound recording had not yet reached its full potential. He believed that future generations would treasure the ability to preserve voices and music, linking the present to the past through sound. For him, invention was never finished. There was always room for improvement. His public reputation during the 1920s was immense. He was honoured at ceremonies, invited to speak at universities, and celebrated in newspapers around the world. Journalists often described him as the grand old man of invention, a living bridge between the 19th century's age of steam and the 20th century's electrical age. Despite these honours, Edison remained humble in his personal habits. He ate simple meals, wore modest clothes, and preferred long hours in the lab to public festivities. Mina, his wife, balanced the family's social obligations, often hosting events at Glenmont, while Edison quietly slipped back to his workshop whenever possible. His friendships with Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone also deepened in these years. The trio, sometimes joined by other figures, continued their camping trips and public appearances. These outings captured the public's imagination, blending the image of rugged exploration with modern industry. Crowds followed their travels through newspaper reports, seeing in them both adventure and reassurance that the nation's leading innovators were also ordinary men who enjoyed nature and companionship. By now, Edison's life had stretched across eras of astonishing change. He had been born in a world lit by candles and gas lamps, and he now lived in a time of radios, airplanes, and electric cities. Through it all, he never lost his conviction that human progress depended on persistence, curiosity, and the courage to try again after failure. In the 1920s, as Edison entered the final decade of his life, he witnessed the world embracing technologies that had grown from seeds he helped plant. Cities across the globe glowed with electric lights, factories ran on power grids, and music from phonographs filled homes. Radios brought voices across continents, and motion pictures entertained audiences in grand theatres. Though not all of these industries remained under his control, their very existence testified to his influence. For Edison, this era was both rewarding and humbling. He could look back on decades of labour and see tangible results. Darkness banished from streets, sound preserved, images captured. Yet he often reminded visitors that invention was never the work of one man alone. He praised his assistants, acknowledged rivals, and emphasised that progress was a collective effort. Such humility made his fame all the more enduring. In 1927, the nation prepared to celebrate the 50th anniversary of his phonograph. Ceremonies were planned, dignitaries invited, and the press declared it a milestone in modern history. Edison himself, now a frail but still active man, attended events with quiet pride. At one gathering, schoolchildren sang songs in his honour, their young voices echoing the very sounds his invention had preserved. It was a moving reminder of how deeply his work had touched ordinary lives. Around the same time, Edison collaborated with his old friend Henry Ford on a project of memory and tribute. Ford, eager to preserve America's industrial heritage, constructed Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, a living museum of historical buildings and artifacts. At its heart, Ford recreated Edison's original Menlo Park laboratory, carefully moving structures and equipment to capture the spirit of the place where the light bulb had been born. In 1929, Edison himself attended the dedication. Weak and elderly, he was guided through the reconstructed laboratory, where he sat at the familiar workbench as if time had turned back. President Herbert Hoover, Ford, Firestone, and other figures stood nearby, paying tribute to the man who had defined an era. The event was broadcast live on radio, allowing millions to listen as Edison, with effort, spoke briefly to the crowd. His words were simple, but their weight carried across the nation. A farewell from the man who had given voice to machines. In those final years, Edison continued to visit his West Orange laboratory, though his strength declined. He spent more time at Glenmont, surrounded by family, walking slowly through the gardens he loved. Even then, he carried notebooks, jotting ideas, sketching concepts, unwilling to let go of the habit of invention. For him, curiosity was not a profession, but a way of life, one that lasted until his final days. The late 1920s brought Edison into the twilight of his long journey, yet his presence remained a source of inspiration for the nation. Though his health weakened, his mind continued to wander restlessly toward problems still unsolved. Visitors who came to Glenmont often found him seated near a window with a notebook, sketching small designs or jotting down questions. He no longer had the stamina for long nights in the laboratory, but invention remained the rhythm of his thoughts. Friends like Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone visited often, sharing stories, discussing industry, and reminiscing about their adventures as vagabonds. Their conversations blended nostalgia with ongoing curiosity about the future. Ford, in particular, admired Edison's resilience and often told others that America owed much of its spirit of innovation to his mentor. Public recognition reached new heights during these years. Edison received medals, honorary degrees, and messages of gratitude from around the world. Foreign leaders sent congratulations, school children wrote letters, and newspapers published retrospectives of his life. The Wizard of Menlo Park, once a nickname, had become part of national folklore. Yet Edison himself seemed less concerned with honours than with small moments of discovery. He continued to believe that the true joy of invention lay in the process, not in the applause. At West Orange, his laboratory remained active under the guidance of loyal assistants. They carried on projects inspired by his earlier ideas, ensuring that the place still pulsed with energy even when Edison could not be present. The buildings, filled with the smell of oil, metal and wood, stood as a monument to decades of relentless creativity. To many visitors, walking through the labs felt like stepping into history, where every tool and sketch seemed to whisper of past triumphs. Edison's family life also gained importance in these years. Mina, his wife, cared for him with patience and devotion, organising his schedule and shielding him from the overwhelming demands of the public. Their children, now grown, supported him in different ways, some through business, others through companionship. Charles, one of his sons, would later take on responsibilities connected to Edison's companies and legacy, continuing the family's involvement in industry. The closing years also gave Edison time for reflection. He occasionally spoke about the arc of his life, from the boy who had set up experiments in a basement to the man who had witnessed cities illuminated by electricity. He marvelled at the progress of science, noting that each generation stood on the shoulders of the one before. His humility remained striking. He insisted he had simply worked hard and refused to give up, while others credited him with changing the course of civilization. As the decade neared its end, Edison grew frailer, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Even in weakness, he represented endurance, the idea that curiosity and determination could carry a person across the boundaries of time. As the 1930s unfolded, Thomas Edison's health declined steadily, yet his stature in the public eye grew even larger. America, struggling through the Great Depression, looked to figures like Edison as symbols of resilience and ingenuity. Newspapers ran stories celebrating his life, reminding readers that persistence and hard work could overcome hardship. To many, Edison embodied the national spirit of never surrendering in the face of obstacles. At Glenmont, his family estate, Edison spent more time in quiet routines. He walked slowly through the gardens, admired the changing seasons, and sat for long hours in his study surrounded by books and notebooks. Visitors often found him reflective, yet still curious. He asked questions about new technologies, radio broadcasting, aviation, even early experiments with television. Though no longer actively experimenting, he remained engaged with the unfolding world of science. His conversations with guests revealed a man who, despite frailty, maintained the same restless curiosity that had guided him from boyhood. Public tributes continued to pour in. Civic groups organized celebrations, schools held assemblies, and inventors credited him as their inspiration. Henry Ford, ever devoted to his old friend, created a museum of innovation in Dearborn, Michigan, placing Edison at its center. The reconstructed Menlo Park Laboratory, carefully preserved, became a shrine to invention. Edison himself, though weak, attended its dedication in 1929, where he sat once more at his workbench before a crowd that included the President of the United States. The event symbolized a nation's gratitude to the man who had brought light to its nights. At home, Mina provided steady care, ensuring that Edison's final years were dignified and peaceful. Their children, grown and accomplished, visited often. Charles, in particular, worked closely with his father, preparing to safeguard the legacy of Edison's companies and name. The family shielded him from the more exhausting demands of publicity, though Edison continued to receive letters daily from admirers around the world. He read many of them, sometimes smiling, sometimes offering short replies. His humility never faded. When praised as the greatest genius of the age, he would shrug and insist that his success came only from trying longer than others. As illness limited his strength, Edison reflected more openly on the meaning of invention. He emphasized that discovery was not about sudden flashes of brilliance, but about steady, methodical effort. To him, the world always had more problems to solve, more mysteries to uncover. He encouraged younger inventors to stay patient, to see failure as a friend, and to keep faith in the value of persistence. In this way, even as his own hands grew still, Edison continued to guide others. His life was drawing to a close, but his influence remained as strong as the light that now illuminated every city street. By 1930, Thomas Edison was 83 years old, and the weight of a long, extraordinary life was evident. His health was fragile, yet his mind still turned to invention, if only in thought rather than experiment. Each day at Glenmont followed a gentle rhythm. Walks through the gardens when strength allowed, moments with Mina at his side, and visits from children and grandchildren who brought both comfort and pride. The laboratory at West Orange remained active, but Edison could no longer participate as he once had. Instead, he received reports from assistants, asked questions, and offered occasional suggestions. Even in weakness, he maintained a keen interest in ongoing projects, showing that his spirit of inquiry never dimmed. His friendships endured as well. Henry Ford visited often, bringing energy and affection. Ford considered Edison a mentor, and their bond deepened in these twilight years. Harvey Firestone also came regularly, ensuring that the circle of companions known as the Vagabonds stayed intact. Their conversations, though quieter now, still touched on industry, science, and the future of America. Public recognition of Edison's life continued to grow. Journalists published long retrospectives of his career, recounting how he had transformed modern existence. Schools held lessons in his honor, and communities named streets, schools, and parks after him. For a generation facing the hardships of the Depression, Edison's story was a beacon of perseverance. He had risen from a poor boy in Ohio to become a man whose ideas lit the world. Even as his body weakened, Edison's humility remained unchanged. When admirers called him a genius, he repeated his old phrase, "Genius was mostly hard work." He wanted people to understand that persistence mattered more than brilliance, that anyone could achieve something meaningful if they refused to give up. At home, Mina carefully managed his days, balancing the desire of the public to see him with the need for rest. She protected his privacy while ensuring that he felt the gratitude surrounding him. Edison, for his part, seemed at peace. Though he sometimes expressed frustration at his physical limitations, he also voiced wonder at how far the world had come since his youth. He had been born into a time of candlelight and horse-drawn wagons, and he now lived in an age of radios, airplanes, and electric cities. The transformation was profound, and he knew he had played a central role. In his final years, Edison became a figure of both history and hope, a reminder that persistence could illuminate even the darkest of times. By 1931, Thomas Edison's long life was nearing its close. His health grew weaker with each passing month, and he spent most of his time at Glenmont surrounded by the care of Mina and his family. The once tireless inventor who had worked nights without sleep now moved slowly, conserving his strength. Yet even in frailty, there was a quiet dignity about him, the presence of a man whose work had transformed the modern world. Friends and admirers visited often, eager to pay their respects. Henry Ford came repeatedly, sitting at Edison's side and recalling memories of their travels and inventions. Ford treated Edison not only as a mentor but as family, and his devotion in these final days was touching. Harvey Firestone also visited, bringing news of industry and expressing gratitude for a lifetime of inspiration. These gatherings were tender, filled with reminiscence rather than planning, though Edison's mind still drifted to questions of science. He asked about progress in radios, about experiments with materials, about the direction of new technologies. Even in weakness, curiosity remained the thread of his being. Across the nation, people awaited news of Edison's health. Newspapers printed daily updates, and messages of encouragement poured into Glenmont. The country understood that an era was ending. Edison had become more than a man. He was a symbol of American determination and creativity. For millions, his life embodied the idea that persistence could overcome any obstacle. Inside the quiet rooms of Glenmont, Edison spent his days resting near windows, looking out at gardens he had once walked with energy. Mina read to him, children visited, and grandchildren filled the house with life. The family shielded him from overwhelming attention, ensuring his final months were peaceful. Yet he still scribbled occasional notes in his familiar hand, small reminders of ideas unfinished. On October 18, 1931, Thomas Edison passed away at the age of 84. His death was met with an outpouring of national grief. Newspapers around the world carried the news, describing him as the man who had brought light to humanity. President Herbert Hoover called for a moment of darkness in tribute. On the night of his funeral, electric lights across the United States were dimmed for 1 minute, a gesture that moved millions. It was as if the nation paused to honour the man who had given it light, only to bring the glow back stronger than before. Edison's passing marked the close of one of history's most remarkable lives, yet his influence would endure far beyond his years. The death of Thomas Edison in October 1931 left the world reflecting on the scale of his contributions. For days, newspapers printed tributes, recounting how his inventions had altered daily life. They described the boy who'd been considered difficult in school, the telegraph operator who had experimented on trains, and the inventor whose laboratory had become the birthplace of light, sound, and motion. His story was told as a national epic, a tale of persistence that inspired people facing the hardships of the Great Depression. Public mourning was profound. Crowds gathered outside Glenmont, leaving flowers and letters. Across the nation, communities held vigils. The symbolic darkening of lights across America on the night of his funeral became one of the most memorable gestures of respect in modern history. For 1 minute, cities and towns returned to darkness, only to shine again, honouring the man who had brought electric light into the world. At his funeral, leaders from government, business, and science attended. Speeches emphasized not only his inventions, but also his example of resilience. Mina, his devoted wife, received condolences from around the globe. Letters came from heads of state, scholars, and ordinary citizens who wanted her to know how deeply Edison had touched their lives. Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, his closest friends, stood at the ceremony with visible emotion. For them, Edison's passing was not only the loss of a great inventor, but of a companion whose wisdom and humour had shaped their own lives. After his burial at Glenmont, attention turned to how his legacy would be preserved. His laboratories at West Orange were already seen as historic, filled with artifacts of invention. Discussions began about maintaining them as museums, places where future generations could walk among the benches and tools that had changed history. For Edison's children, the responsibility was both practical and symbolic. Charles Edison, who would later become governor of New Jersey, took a leading role in organizing his father's legacy. The family understood that Edison was no ordinary figure. His name would forever be tied to the progress of the modern world. In classrooms, Edison's life was retold as a lesson in persistence. Teachers described how he had made thousands of failed experiments before success, encouraging students to see failure not as defeat, but as part of discovery. For a nation facing economic hardship, this message was powerful. Edison's life became a story of hope. That steady effort, even in the face of obstacles, could illuminate the path forward. In the years following Edison's death, his legacy became firmly woven into the fabric of American life. The laboratories at West Orange, once filled with the bustle of invention, were preserved as monuments to creativity. Visitors walked through the rooms where light bulbs had first glowed and phonographs had first spoken, feeling as if history still lingered in the air. Tools, notebooks, and half-finished experiments remained in place, silent reminders of a mind that never ceased searching for answers. Glenmont, his home, also became a place of remembrance. Tourists came to see the estate where Edison had lived with Mina and their children, strolling through gardens and hallways that reflected both simplicity and grandeur. For many, standing near his grave was a moment of connection with a man whose work had touched their lives in the most ordinary yet profound ways, through the lamps that lit their homes, the music that played from phonographs, and the motion pictures that entertained them. Across the nation, Edison's story was taught in schools, celebrated in civic events, and honoured in museums. His name became shorthand for invention itself. Children spoke of pulling an Edison when they tried something new, and newspapers continued to use his image as a symbol of progress. The idea that persistence mattered more than brilliance, one of his favourite lessons, resonated with generations who saw in his life a guide for their own struggles. Internationally, Edison's fame endured as well. Nations credited him with sparking industries that spread worldwide. From Tokyo to London, from Buenos Aires to Berlin, electric lights and recorded sound carried his imprint. Even where rival inventors had built upon his ideas, Edison was remembered as the pioneer who had made them practical and real. His friends, especially Henry Ford, worked tirelessly to ensure his story would not fade. Ford's Greenfield village in Dearborn became a living tribute, with the reconstructed Menlo Park laboratory as its centerpiece. School groups, families, and visitors from around the world came to walk the wooden floors and imagine the nights when Edison and his team worked tirelessly to bring light to the darkness. As time passed, Edison's life was not only remembered for his inventions, but also for what he represented: the power of persistence, the value of curiosity, and the belief that ordinary people could change the world through determination. He had lived long enough to see his own legend form, but the decades after his passing proved that the light he had sparked would not fade. As the decades moved further from Edison's lifetime, his influence remained strong, shaping how people understood invention and progress. The 1930s and 1940s saw his story retold in countless articles, radio programs, and school books. During World War II, his example was often invoked as proof that American ingenuity could overcome any challenge. Posters and broadcasts reminded citizens that persistence, the same quality that had driven Edison to test thousands of filaments would also carry the nation through wartime trials. Museums and institutions preserved his work with increasing care. The West Orange Laboratory was declared a National Historic Site, ensuring that the rooms where assistants once hurried, where bulbs first glowed, and where phonographs first sang would be protected for generations. Visitors walked the hall quietly, imagining the sound of tools, the smell of chemicals, and the energy of late-night experiments. For many, the experience was a reminder that progress was not abstract, but born from real hands, real failures, and real persistence. Edison's family also carried his legacy forward. Charles Edison became a prominent public figure, serving as governor of New Jersey and later as Secretary of the Navy. His work in public service reflected his father's sense of duty and connection to the nation. Through Charles and other family members, the Edison name remained active in both industry and civic life. Internationally, Edison's reputation continued to shine. Nations cited his inventions as milestones in the global advance of technology. In Europe and Asia, exhibitions displayed his bulbs, phonographs, and film devices as part of the heritage of modern civilization. Writers compared him to the great minds of history, placing his name alongside Da Vinci, Galileo, and Newton. Yet even as his fame grew, the essence of Edison's legacy stayed grounded in humility. The lesson that failure could be a stepping stone to success outlived him. Teachers told students how he had once remarked that he had not failed, but found thousands of ways that would not work. This message inspired young people across cultures to keep experimenting, to keep asking questions, and to keep faith in discovery. By the mid-20th century, Edison's image was firmly set as both inventor and symbol. He was remembered not only for the electric light, but for the belief that human curiosity, when paired with persistence, could transform the world. His story continued to illuminate paths for scientists, entrepreneurs and dreamers, long after his own light had dimmed. Nearly a century after Thomas Edison's death, his light still burns in ways both visible and unseen. Every illuminated street, every recorded song, every film projected onto a screen carries a trace of the work he began. His inventions were not isolated marvels, but foundations for entire industries that continue to shape daily life. When people switch on a lamp, listen to a recording, or watch a movie, they are, in some quiet sense, in conversation with the man who first imagined those possibilities. What makes Edison's story enduring is not only the devices he created, but the spirit with which he pursued them. He embodied persistence, the willingness to test thousands of filaments, to endure countless failures, to keep faith in an idea long after others had given up. His life proved that progress often comes not in sudden leaps, but in steady steps, each built upon the last. This message resonates across generations, reminding people that curiosity and determination are as vital as talent. His legacy also lives in the places preserved in his honour. The reconstructed Menlo Park at Greenfield Village, the West Orange Laboratories, and Glenmont stand as living museums where visitors walk among the tools and notebooks of invention. Children lean close to glass cases, imagining Edison at work, while adults reflect on how one person's persistence can ripple across history. These spaces are more than memorials. They're classrooms of inspiration, inviting each generation to ask its own questions and to seek its own answers. Edison's story has also become part of cultural memory. His name is used as a symbol of creativity, his sayings quoted as encouragement, his failures retold as lessons in perseverance. Teachers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers alike find strength in his example. Though science has advanced far beyond the technologies of his time, the qualities that defined him, curiosity, resilience, and relentless effort, remain timeless. In the end, Thomas Edison was more than the man who brought light to the world. He was a reminder that human beings, through persistence and imagination, can reshape their environment, extend the reach of their senses, and alter the rhythm of their lives. From the boy experimenting in a basement to the elder statesman of invention, his journey was one long conversation with possibility. And though his own days ended in 1931, the glow of his work endures, steady and bright, a light that continues to guide the world forward.